Okay, so Regan's approach is a rights-based approach, and in many ways you can see it as kind of denying one of the claims that Singer makes, that you could, in theory, use an individual or discriminate against an individual if it were to lead to good consequences. So Singer thinks that human beings and animals have certain moral rights. These aren't legal rights, so these aren't rights that are enshrined into laws, but they are entitlements or legitimate claims that are held against moral agents. And moral agents are the types of beings capable of acting for moral reasons. So rights are the sorts of things that entail obligation. If you have a right to something, I have an obligation to respect that right. One way we can think about them is as like no trespassing signs or trump cards. So if someone has a right to life or to liberty or something like that, that's not the sort of thing that can be overridden just for the benefit of others. And that's kind of the central way that rights differ from utilitarianism. It's also not an issue of generosity. So things individuals have rights to, it's not just that it would be nice if people respected them or kind, but they have an obligation, they have a duty to respect your rights. So in his book, Empty Cages, Regan's strategy for considering whether and to what extent animals have rights is to start by considering why it is that humans have rights. So he looks at 7 different kind of purported explanations for why human beings have rights. And all of these, he's going to argue, won't explain why it is that we have the rights that we do. So the first explanation he looks at is that humans have rights such as a right to life or liberty or freedom from torture, because we are human, because we're the members of the species human beings. But this he rejects as completely uninformative. If we have rights just because we're humans, you might worry that people would attempt to justify rights just because of the race they were or, the sex they were. It's uninformative and potentially discriminatory. So another explanation is that humans have rights because they're persons. But one of the biggest drawbacks of this is that it would exclude many human beings, that we think do have rights. So young babies, young, infants, older people with Alzheimer's, some of the kind of non-person human beings that we do think have rights. The same goes for the third explanation. Humans have rights because they're self-aware. That won't apply to all human beings. Humans use language. This, he thinks, it's not clear why language would be important or crucial to explaining why we have the rights we do. And again, it's not going to cover all human beings. The fifth explanation is that we have the rights we do because we live in a moral community. Again, there's a problem of clarity. It's not clear why living in a moral community, bestows rights upon us. And then the sixth explanation, humans have souls. You think this is a controversial metaphysical assumption, and even if it were true, it's not clear what about having souls gives us rights. And then the last explanation, that God gave us rights, this is uninformative. We'd want to know what is about us that led God to give us rights. So it lacks the kind of explanatory power that many of the other explanations have. So why is it that humans have rights? Regan wants to say that the answer is that humans have rights because we're subjects of a life. So what he means by subjects of a life is that we are in the world, we exist in the world, we're aware of the world, so we're conscious. And then what happens to us matters to us, to our bodies, to our freedom, to our life. So in a previous work in The Case for Animal Rights, Regan, he packs more into this. So he says things like memory and a sense of the future are requirements of being a subject of a life. Here, this is a more popular work, but he's dropped those things. So all it really amounts to is having consciousness and having welfare interests. All subjects of a life, Singer wants to say, though, are morally equal. So the rights they have to things like their lives, their liberty, and freedom from torture are equal rights. They hold those rights equally. So who are these subjects of a life? All human beings, as we've seen, but also all non-human animals are subjects of a life. And in Empty Cages, Regan says that this would at least include mammals and birds, but he also thinks fish should be included. He limits his argument to the least controversial cases. I think we could say now we have enough evidence to extend this to fish and probably some other animals, but That's how he sets it up. Okay, so what are the consequences of his rights view? Singer thinks that the recognition of the rights that animals have shouldn't lead to bigger cages, but to empty cages. So we should end the use of animals in agriculture. We should stop using animals for clothing, stop using them as performers, and without any reservations, we should stop using them as test subjects. So the upshot, kind of the general upshot of this view, is that animals aren't ours to use. Their rights are going to trump any enjoyment or benefit that we get from using them. So unlike Singer, Regan is going to also take a clear stand against killing. He thinks that all animals, at least that are a subject of a life, have a right not to be killed. Okay, so what concerns or objections might you have to this sort of view? I think some people are concerned about the use of rights, or they find the idea of moral rights somewhat mysterious. They think it might involve some weird kind of metaphysical assumptions. I myself don't find that sort of objection that moving, but that's some worry that some people have. Another worry you might have is whether or not all use is going to violate a being's rights. So we can think of cases where it might be possible to use an animal for certain purposes. So if you have a pet chicken, for example, and you meet all of that chicken's needs and interests, it has a good life, and it also happens that chicken lays eggs, you might wonder, is using that chicken for those eggs consistent with their interests? Is all use violating rights? It's not clear. Regan seems to think so. He kind of goes loosely over that, but you might debate it. Another issue is the extent to which rights theories in general and Regan's in particular is going to be action guiding. So it gives us a good sense of the things we shouldn't do to animals, right? We shouldn't kill them, we shouldn't raise them in the ways we do, but you might think that we have certain positive obligations to our companion animals or to certain animals we live close by to or among, and it doesn't really offer us much guidance for how we should approach those issues. And then there's the issue, particularly if the way you're considering subjects of a life has kind of more cognitive capacities packed in, if you're including, a stronger sense of memory or a sense of the future, it's not clear all animals would count as subjects of a life. And if you're operating on that account, if other animals can feel pain and pleasure, you might think they matter too, and they at least have some rights. Okay, so those are Singer and Regan's views. Let's evaluate them kind of stepping back. I think one interesting thing to note is even though they're coming from these very different theoretical ethical frameworks, they still reach many of the same conclusions. So both think that we should largely end animal agriculture. Singer might allow for some around the edges, but Regan thinks we should get rid of it. They both come out against the use of animals for entertainment and clothing. So they reach many of the same conclusions despite different theoretical starting points. With that, though, Singer's probably not going to be able to reach the same conclusions as Regan. So you can think about certain cases. We've mentioned some of them. The use of animals in rodeos or zoos. It might be the case that when we do our kind of utilitarian calculations, when we consider all the interests, that on his account, some of those things would be justified. So many of us would probably take that to be a reason to favor Regan's account. So it's not clear that all the kind of ending all the uses of animals in many of the problematic ways we do is something we're going to reach on Singer's account. So many people, myself included, think that some of these objections we've raised with utilitarianism suggest that at least a kind of basic rights approach is probably warranted. So we might think that all animals, at least all animals that are sentient, have certain universal and basic rights. But there might be some more we want to add to that. So just looking ahead, next week I'm going to be lecturing about the book Zoopolis, and one of the things that book does is it tries to go beyond the universal basic rights approach that's advocated by Regan. So one of the interesting things about both Singer and Regan is that they've focused on kind of the negative obligations that we have to non-human animals. And that's good, that's important, and in many ways, that is kind of our main focus. But you might think that this misses something, and that lumping all animals together, just kind of in the abstract, misses particular obligations that we'll have to particular animals. So particular animals because of the particular capacities they have and the particular interests that they have, or the ways we stand in certain relations to animals we live with, animals we live among, or animals that we don't live, that we don't live with, that we live outside of human communities. So one of the developments that's happened in animal rights theory is to argue that in addition to universal basic rights, we could think of animals as also having certain relational rights, so rights or obligations that we have towards animals that depend on the relations we stand to with them. So zoopolis, we'll consider that, and we'll talk about that next week. So that's all I got, and I'm happy to talk about questions people have.